Good afternoon. It's a Sunday and I've got very few things to do and I'm still in confinement or quarantine or whatever in the hell you want to call it. I've been getting a lot of comments, questions, etc., or rants and raves even, from a lot of my watchers and blog readers about the quarantine. The contention seems to be, or the main question seems to be, whether or not there's authority to call for a quarantine. Can the state or any government order that people stay inside, stay in place, or do certain things? And if so, is it enforceable? And if so, is it legal or is it constitutional? Well, first off, it probably isn't constitutional. The amendments, which take precedent over the main body, has an amendment that says that the government essentially shall not impede or interfere with or stop or do anything to prevent freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, etc. And that's the First Amendment. So now we come up with the virus. And we might want to protest this or protest that, or support this or support that, but you can't do it in mass. That probably violates the First Amendment. Now, putting that aside, my comment to all the people asking this question is, so what? What is law? We got to look at the law, which has existed before constitutional government. The Constitution is a contract between the citizenry and its government. But before that, before governments were enacted, and if you look in the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, it says, whereas people have assembled, etc., and they enter in an agreement with their sovereign and all that bullshit. If you look at the history, law came from the civilization. We had tribes, we had communities, etc., and they kept getting bigger and bigger. But typically they had a set of rules or agreements, what sociologists call folkways, moreways, or customs that everybody adhered to. So you didn't walk down the street with your dick swinging looking for any female that you could stick it in. You can excuse the crudity, but that makes the point more, I think, clarified. There are certain things you can't do, and one of the things you can't do is going around having sex with any woman you see. Now, there aren't any laws written about that, or there weren't any. It was a custom. And with that custom, it was reinforced by such things as marriage and taboos and things such as this. So, you have a communal group, and the communal group has agreed upon rules. And if the communal group was raised in sort of a free environment, then you have what they called common law. And it's the common custom, the common agreement, or the common mores, folkways, etc. of the community. It's community-based. As the communities grew larger, then there was some dissent, and the dissent was handled in various ways. But in common law and in villages and things such as this, or groups such as this, they're agreed upon by the majority. Enter the Romans and various other governments like that. They come up with code laws. Laws are codified. And they give all the power to the sovereign, whomever that may be, to dictate the laws and enforce them. They have to be enforced with force. So the Romans had their legions. And the Romans didn't care much about the individual developmental laws in the localities in which they'd conquered. All they cared about was taxes, revenue, and slaves. Beyond that, it didn't matter. Now, at that time, you had the Celts, the Anglos, and the Saxons up north, and they developed in the common law. Now, a lot of the common law wasn't legislated. But for instance, in ancient Germany, there weren't laws as such, but there were certain community standards that had to be met. One of the community standards was you treat everybody fairly. You couldn't cheat, you couldn't rob, you couldn't steal. But there weren't any rules codified or decrees about that, but the communities sort of handled it themselves. Anybody that cheated their customers had to wear pig masks. Anyone that disobeyed the community standards had to be put in stocks where the villagers would throw vegetables and other rotten things at them and ridicule them. We get in the stocks a lot of times, and you get the opprobrium of the community. You learn your lesson unless you're a complete ignoramus. Legislation wasn't necessary. So let's take the COVID virus. Now, first thing is, are we a nation? Are we a civilization? Are we a people? Or are we a bunch of cowboys running loose on the prairie and ignoring everyone else and not dealing with a society or living within a society? Every man for himself. I don't think that's the situation, but there's a lot of people that do. Well, that's fine. They can go out and live by themselves. But if they're going to join a community or come into town or do whatever they want to do in association with others, then they got to follow certain rules. And one of the rules, you can go clear back to the Bible, which says, "Thou shalt not kill." Well, if you come into town with certain things like bubonic plague or even the coronavirus, and you go around spreading it, you're killing people. That view is not a communal view. You don't give a shit about the community or your neighbors or whatever. And if that's the case, then probably the community should be entitled to ostracize you, outlaw you, put you in stocks, or wear a pig mask, none of which requires any kind of legislation. So yes, we have a constitution. And what the Constitution does is it prohibits the government. And what is a government? That's a formal congregation of people. But it has nothing to do with folkways or community standards or anything like that. So those of you out there saying the government can't force me to do this, or the government can't force you to do that, or it's against the Constitution, that is exactly true. But in my view, it doesn't matter. Whether it's constitutional or not is irrelevant. What is relevant is your view toward society. What is relevant is your view toward others. Are you better than others or not? If you're better than others, that's fine. If you're much better than others, go out and employ or get a factory and exploit labor, or go catch some slaves and make them work for you. There's no constitutional provision in some areas about that. In fact, slavery has been around since you had tribal customs and tribes. They'd go out and enslave the other tribes. They didn't need laws about that. They didn't make regulations. They didn't make rules. Slavery was a natural order until such time as it became accepted among civilized cultures that you didn't enslave people. So we have a civilization now that says you shouldn't go around infecting people. And it's not a legislation, it's not a codification of anything. It is common sense, it's common courtesy. So it's also one of the obligations that you have to live in a community. I remember my first week or two in law school. We were taught that for any law, any obligation, there is a corresponding duty. So it's a two-way street. And it's still a two-way street. You can't expect the community to support you and help you and look out after you when you screw them all the time, when you give them the finger, when you ignore them. If you want to get along, you have to go along. Now, you can be a jerk. Nobody can ostracize you for that. Or nobody can put you in the jail for that, or shouldn't put you in the jail. But like in the old colonial days, they could brand you, maybe brand you with a J for jerk, or an A for asshole, or something like that. But unless someone doesn't want to live in a society or want a civilized society or not live in a state of nature, then one has to adhere to certain norms, folkways, etc. And those have nothing to do with constitutional law. They have to do with living in a society. And we have to differentiate. A famous criminologist said once that in order to treat criminals effectively, you have to show people that there's a different standard or a difference in violating the law, in running a stop sign, or committing murder. And that's the same type of decision that's made here. It's not a legal decision. It's not a moral decision. It's a decision based on humanity and upon social awareness. So, take off the blinders and think not only of yourself, but think of the community and others. And that's it for today. Have a good Sunday. Bye.